Congratulations. The fact you clicked on this video is a clear sign to me that you are taking your language learning seriously this year. So today, in order to build on this momentum, I'm going to share some of my top language learning tips. I've had quite an intense language learning journey myself. I speak 7 languages with varying degrees of fluency. I'm fluent in 4, and then the remaining 3 getting there. And one of those 3 is Spanish, and that's the language I really want to focus on this year. I am going to be participating in a Lingoda Sprint. I don't know if you've ever heard of Lingoda or their sprints before, but basically they are a 2-month challenge. And here is the cool part. If you go to every single one of your classes, you will get money back. If you opt for Lingoda Sprint, which is the smaller package of 15 classes per month or 30 classes in total, you will get 50% of your money back. Pretty cool. But if you are feeling ambitious and you really want to challenge yourself, you can opt for the Lingoda Super Sprint, which is 30 classes a month or 60 classes in total. And if you go to every single one of your classes, you will get all your money back. It will be free. The entire thing will be free. And to sweeten the deal, I actually managed to get a code from Lingoda to give you a discount. The code is right here. It's also in the description and in the pinned comment. If you want to go check it out, you will get $25 off or 20 euros off. My first tip is to set goals. Language learning can get challenging, and when you don't have that structure, it's really hard to stick to it. So set goals and make sure that they are SMART. Okay, so yes, it's a fun acronym. This is exactly why I'm excited to do the Lingoda Sprint, because it has a time limit on it, i.e. 60 days. It keeps me on track with daily classes, and it is a very specific project that I'm working on. Tip number 2, know your why. What is the reason you're studying this specific language? And I will say some whys are better than others. For example, anything that's intrinsically motivated, anything that is a big passion of yours. For example, oh, I'm learning Japanese because I really like their cinematography. That's a great reason. Less good reason is I'm learning French at school and it is what it is. I don't really want to learn it, but here we are. Number 3, set a specific learning plan. We already talked about setting goals, and this is something a little bit different. When I talk about your learning plan, what I mean is find ways that you're going to fit it into your daily life. When are you going to find those pockets of time where you can really devote yourself to language study? And also make sure that as you're developing your learning plan, you already have some materials in place that you are going to be using to learn the language. But I do want to warn you against a tendency I have noticed among beginner learners, and that is to commit far too much money upfront to a course of study that might not be super relevant to their learning style. Something like a 2-month taster like the Lingoda Sprint is absolutely perfect, but anything that is gonna take you on a long, expensive journey, I would caution against. Tip number 5, speaking of saving money, did you know that your local library probably has a lot of language resources available completely for free? Tip number 6, intensity of study trumps duration. It is far more valuable to sit down for an hour, really get your head down and focus on the material in front of you, than it is to spend 4 hours blankly staring at your notes, scrolling on your phone, and not really engaging with the material. In fact, the former is going to make you feel really energized, while the latter is going to make you feel like a bit of a failure, right? Because you have just spent 4 hours and you haven't really gained much. Tip number 7, one language at a time. If you're someone who's quite experienced in this field, then by all means disregard it. I personally have disregarded it many times, but sometimes to my detriment. When you are learning multiple languages, you are constantly forcing your brain to switch between them, and that leads to a bit of a lag in your brain, and it leads to sometimes confusing different terms and can just make the whole thing a little more complicated than it necessarily needs to be. Tip number 8, prioritize language learning. I get it, we're all short on time. Like, I have this YouTube thing, I have a job, I have other things and hobbies, and sometimes I want to see my friends. What? So it can feel like I don't really have enough hours in the day to focus on language learning. But then I look at my screen stats on my phone and I realize that I spend 3 hours every day scrolling through TikTok. So I clearly do have time. I'm just not disciplined enough. Tip number 9, learn in small chunks. A lot of us, myself very much included, can be extremely self-critical when it comes to our own learning. So we can look back at a session we've done and feel like we just haven't made enough progress. And the next time we sit down, we want to punish ourselves by saying, okay, but by the end of the session, I need to have memorized the entire chapter. And look, in that session, we might actually achieve it. By the end of that session, if we drill enough, we might have committed those words to memory. But guess what's going to happen? They're going to disappear because your brain just can't keep up with that much demand. So instead, focus on manageable chunks of vocabulary, grammar, whatever you're focusing on that day, and really repeat them enough times so that they stick in your head. Tip number 10, fill empty pockets of time with learning. Look, it takes 5 minutes to do a bit of vocab revision. It takes 5 minutes to conjugate a new verb, and those 5 minutes can actually really boost your learning. I know it can feel like 5 minutes is not enough, but it is when done consistently and repeatedly over a long period of time. Tip number 11, be consistent. Study every day. This is exactly why I'm participating in the Lingoda Sprint, because it's going to force me to be on top of my learning and to really commit to showing up every day, which is probably the hardest part. The one added benefit of programs like the Lingoda Sprint is the fact that you are accountable to somebody else. Tip number 12, study in the morning. Studies show that our brains are freshest after we wake up. Maybe not immediately after we wake up, we might need that morning coffee, but that is the best time of day to be devoting yourself to study. Tip number 13, stay true to your learning style. If you physically recoiled at the thought of waking up early to study, that is absolutely fine, because when you are creating your study plan, you need to honor your personal learning needs and learning preferences. I know that I'm a visual and audio learner. Other learners are far more analytical. There is no right or wrong way to learn a language as long as you're learning it. Tip number 14, turn it into a game. Take your favorite computer game and set it to your target language. Tip number 15, build in rewards. No matter how hard you try, there are going to be patches of learning that you're just not going to enjoy. They're going to be a slog, and that's okay, because what I'm suggesting here is rewarding yourself. Treat yourself. Tip number 16, rely on multiple methods. It's important that your learning encompasses several aspects. It needs to focus on reading and writing and grammar and speaking. And if you're only focusing on one of those, your language skills aren't going to be well-rounded. Tip number 17, acquire, don't learn. There are so many proponents of this learning style because it mimics early childhood and how we acquire language as children. That's all I'm going to say on it today, but there are loads of resources on YouTube if you want to learn more and be a bit more scientific about your approach to language learning. Tip number 18, learn the 100 most common words. Not all words are created equal. There are different words that just get used far more frequently than others in everyday speech. And if you're at the beginning of your learning journey, this is a really good way to speed up your progress. Tip number 19, learn phrases, not words. Once you move past the initial stage of memorizing those 100 words, you should turn your attention to phrases and sentences rather than standalone terms. It improves your speed when you're speaking. Instead of trying to say, what's the word for blue? Okay, blue, I've got that. Now let me search my brain for car. Okay, car, and then drive. What was the verb for drive again? You're gonna have that sentence ready-made in your brain. Tip number 20, don't be a perfectionist. Is this an aspect of language study that I struggle with? Yes, it is. It's very hard not to be a perfectionist because none of us want to sound stupid. If someone who speaks English as their second language makes a mistake, do you judge them? No, right? You're impressed that they can speak it as well as they do. So assume that the same is going to happen to you. People are really patient and really kind. If anything, they're just glad that you're learning their language. Tip number 21, be creative. If you're talking about something and you don't know a word, instead of getting frustrated and feeling inadequate, try being creative. Okay, so you want to say the word carrot. Why are carrots on my mind? Carrot. But you don't know how to say it. For example, I don't know how to say that in Spanish. But I do know how to say long, I do know how to say orange, and I do know how to say vegetable. So if I say, can I get the long orange vegetable? I'm gonna sound silly, but I think I'm gonna get my point across. Tip number 22, cultivate a positive mindset. I know this is starting to sound a lot like a self-help video, and it's not, but I will say that your mental state is a huge part of your learning. Science time. There are many studies on the topic of anxiety and how that changes the workings of our brain. For example, if you're really nervous, if you're really stressed, if you're really anxious, your adrenaline levels go up. What that results in is the blood flow and the energy being redirected to your limbs so you can go into fight or flight mode. Okay? How is that related to language learning? Well, if you're rerouting energy from your brain to other parts of your body, your brain isn't going to be on its A game, is it? Tip number 23, habit stacking. This is a really common and super simple productivity hack that I totally recommend to everyone. All you have to do is take things that you do on a daily basis and combine them to form these habits or habit stacks. So, for example, if you go jogging every day, which kudos to you, you might want to listen to a playlist in your target language. And because exercise increases your blood flow, it also improves your brain's functioning. So it actually really helped me commit new vocabulary to memory, and it made it more fun. Tip number 24, study pronunciation patterns. It's really important that you understand how pronunciation works in your target language, because without it, you're gonna struggle with even the most simple of tasks, like reading a menu, right? You're gonna be looking at it and you're gonna be like, okay, I see this word, but I have no idea what it sounds like. Tip number 25, make a playlist. Music is fun and it makes language learning more fun. It helps you appreciate the local culture, and some cultures especially have really good music, so you're gonna expand your horizons. And this leads me to tip 26, which is to translate lyrics. Try and transcribe what they're saying, then just translate it back into your mother tongue and pick any vocabulary you didn't understand. Tip number 27, watch Netflix. What a fun tip. You can just sit down. In fact, you don't even need to sit. You can lie down and watch your favorite Netflix series, or ideally you would pick one from the country where that language is spoken, so you're also learning about the culture. And then of course put the subtitles on. Depending on your level, you can put English subtitles on if you're a beginner, so you just get the sound of the language, or if you're more advanced, keep the subtitles in that language. Tip number 28, use native materials. When you reach a certain level, it's really important that you start using native materials, and what I mean by that is newspapers, magazines, books that locals actually use and read. Because if you don't do that, you run the risk of sounding a little bit robotic. Tip number 29, listen to the radio. When you're listening to that or a podcast, you can't see the speakers. And believe it or not, that actually makes up a huge portion of our comprehension. So if you take away the visual side of it and all the visual clues about what they're talking about, it can be more challenging, but also more rewarding. Tip number 30, slow it down. If you're watching Netflix or you're listening to a YouTube video and you're really struggling to comprehend what's being said, there is a really useful tool. You can actually control the speed of the playback. Tip number 31, travel. Personally, I love travel. It's one of my favorite things to do, but if you aren't able to travel to a country where that language is spoken, that's okay. You might be able to find it locally. And I know I'm biased because I live in London, which is one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world, but if I was learning pretty much any language in the world, I could find people in my city who speak it and who might be willing to interact with me. Tip number 32, use the internet. You're obviously doing it right now, so check. But do remember just how many resources are available to you, and many free of charge. Tip number 33, make flashcards. Call me old school, I still really like the classic pen and paper method, but I have slowly been warming up to more modern methods of creating flashcards, like the Anki app, which is often mentioned by language YouTubers, and for good reason. It is really helpful. It has a unique algorithm that helps speed up your learning. Tip number 34, get a study buddy. They don't even need to be studying the same language as you are. They don't even need to be studying a language at all. It's just someone who is going to be willing to check in with you and make sure you've done your work for the day. Tip number 35, be cultured. Really fully immerse yourself in the culture of the country where your language is spoken. Focus on the food or the film, the cinematography, the art that makes me want to communicate with the locals even more and gives me an additional topic to speak about. Install the Toucan Chrome extension. This extension really seamlessly helps you learn new vocabulary. It basically translates random words on any given web page into your target language, which you can set in a drop-down menu. And then when you hover over them, it gives you the pronunciation and the description. Tip number 37, get a native teacher. This is yet another reason why I'm doing the Lingoda Sprint. They work with more than 1,500 certified native teachers who will help you build really good habits. They will help improve your accent because you're going to be hearing that native language spoken from the get-go, and they will understand all the nuances and all the intricacies of their language because they use it day in, day out, and they have been doing so from the moment they were born. Tip number 38, get a pen pal. Find someone, whether it's a friend you've met in person or someone you meet online, who you communicate with in your target language. If you already find yourself in a country where that language is spoken and you're dating, bingo, absolutely incredibly helpful. My first ever boyfriend was Russian, and guess what? My Russian is pretty good. Tip number 39, speak, speak, speak. Even if it is just hello, thank you, how are you? You can have these stilted conversations. It's still better than nothing, because what you're creating is a habit of speaking, of saying these words out loud, and also you're building your comfort levels, which is possibly the most important thing. Tip number 40, try scriptorium. This is a method developed by an American linguist whose name, ironically, I am not sure how to pronounce, but I think it's Alexander Arguel, but also maybe it's not. Anyway, this method is really straightforward, and what it really helps you with is understanding how the written language corresponds with spoken language, and it's also a good memorization technique. Tip number 41, focus on repetition. Is it repetition is the mother of wisdom? Is that the saying? Something like that. Whatever. It's a good thing to do. Just do it. Do it, do it, do it, do it, you get it. Tip number 42, talk to yourself. When you're going about your everyday life, narrate what you're doing. Yes, it's bonkers. It's a really weird thing to do, but it's hugely gonna help you with useful vocabulary acquisition. Tip number 43, record yourself. I know most of you are not gonna feel comfortable doing this, but as you do it, and I do think you should do it, remind yourself that this video is not for public consumption. You can talk about anything. You can set yourself a topic for that 5-minute speech, or you can just free talk, just sit down and see what comes out. But really try and talk. Tip number 44, improve your accent. Speaking from personal experience, insecurities about my pronunciation and my accent have probably been some of the biggest obstacles I've had to overcome on my language journey. There are so many resources out there that can help you improve. Also, friends who speak that language might be eager to help you improve. Like, I love teaching people the Czech sound r, like the word rzeřicha. It's really hard to say. Try it. Let me know how you got on. Tip number 45, balance the 4 skills. The 4 main skills are listening, reading, speaking, and writing. And we've already talked about this earlier. When creating your study plan, make sure that you are focusing on all 4 aspects equally. Tip number 46, use mnemonics and association. As I was doing research for this video, I came across a great example of this, and it uses the Spanish verb caber, which means to fit. Okay, and I think it was on Mark Mance's website. Hopefully I'm attributing this to the right person. And apparently the way he memorized this word is by imagining a bear fitting into a cab. Tip number 47, learn cognates, words shared by different languages. For example, if you speak English, you might notice that a lot of English words are borrowed from Romance languages. Say a lot of words that end in shun, T-I-O-N. How is T-I-O-N pronounced shun? Do you see what I mean about English being crazy? But a lot of those words are literally spelt the same way in French, just pronounced differently. And then in Spanish, you just slightly change the suffix to sion. Tip number 48, you're not too old. A recent study from the University of Haifa found that adults actually showed a much bigger propensity for picking up on grammatical concepts than children. There's also some proof that adults tend to be better at pronunciation than children. To be fully fair, yes, our mental capacity somewhat reduces. For example, professional chess players peak in their early 20s, and as they age, their ability decreases. So yes, to a minor degree, you can use this excuse, but it's not a super valid one. Tip number 49, if you're learning a language that is quite similar to a language you already know, there are some false friends, as they're called. So for example, the word embarrassed in English, and then there's the word embarazada in Spanish. You'd think they'd mean the same thing, right? Well, wrong. This one means pregnant. So you can imagine a few awkward conversations arising out of that confusion. Tip number 50, don't wait. As the saying goes, the best time was a year ago, but the second best time is today. So just commit yourself to learning and give it your best shot. I want to highlight the Lingoda Sprint that I'm doing one more time in case you are really interested in improving your skills this year, because that 2-month crash course is going to really make a difference. Let me know if you're joining me. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed these tips and found it helpful. I know this was a long video, so congratulations for making it through to the end, and I will see you next Friday. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye.